actually. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar series that we are organizing around the book All In, a Revolutionary Theory to Stop Climate Collapse. So All In is a book of which I'm a co-author. Mariana is another co-author. The idea of the book that we have is to solve a question for social movements and for organizers. So the main statement of the book, or the main, let's say, the extract of the book, is to find a theory of change and an organizational form that supports it to answer the big questions, the big strategy questions of our time, right? So that is basically the understanding that system change is necessary, so dismantling of capitalism, but at the same time, it comes hand in hand with some very specific, almost physical, chemical deadlines around the climate crisis. So we are in All In, basically, we're trying to do some sort of climate-informed class politics or class-informed climate politics, depending on how you say it. So that is, so basically it's a book about theory of change and the organizational structure surrounding it. And it is organized in 6 propositions. The first proposition is that we are handling a global issue, and the second is that we are handling a class issue. And then the remaining 4 propositions are about the larger theory of change and the organizational form that we refer to as movement as party, but it could be said ecology of social movements with some more intentionality in it and so on. So that is more or less what the book is. Now, per proposition, we want to hold webinars starting today. And this is our first webinar, and it's called Globalization and Translocal Movement Building. So that is the part about global business, right? And the starting point of this is that the problems we are dealing with as social movements and as organizers they make sense at global level. So they can only be understood at the level of abstraction of global understanding, right? So this can be 10 years ago, the anti-austerity movement had to understand in Europe, had to understand its problems at the global level, right? It didn't. There was no austerity measure at national level. These were all measured and calculated and implemented and imposed at with global entities or transnational entities. The same with going further back, anti-colonial movements were very well aware that that the forces that they were working against were globally organized, and they were also building global solidarity to fight the colonial regimes. And of course, more related to where myself and Mariana come from, climate justice, besides all this larger frameworks and the energy politics or geopolitics of energy and so on, there's the obvious issue of having a planetary crisis that brings the global perspective in mind. So the main statement we are doing is that all these major crises that we are handling, they're not only happening globally, but they are also being done globally. So that is the structure that we are facing is organized at the global level. And we start with the suggestion that one could argue that we have today more global states than we had nation state in 19th century. So when we were talking about all these national struggles, national politics in 19th century, when you actually look at the state apparatus, and if you look at the globalized state apparatus today, you can see that actually they're comparable, right? So that is the terrain of the battle. So this is where we are coming from. This is where this session is coming from. And we want to talk about the context, about like where we are, and then we want to talk about how we can respond to that. And that's basically our 2 speakers. Coşkun Adalı will be our first speaker. He's an author of several books in Turkish. His main area of, let's say, expertise or or interest is about capitalism and the world capitalist system. He has also lectured on economic history in Paris University for more than a decade, if I'm not mistaken. So he will be giving us the context, and then we will move on to Mariana. Mariana is the co-author of All In, and she's an organizer and trainer in a variety of movements, mainly in the climate justice movement recently, and has been doing a lot of the international, transnational work within the climate justice movement. So she will be talking about like how we can respond to that context, how we can how we can address it. So this is going to be more or less the structure. We would like to give 15-20 minutes each for each speakers, and then we will have a moment for questions, comments, and we are aiming at 1.5 hours, maybe up to 2 hours at most for this session. And I will pass the ball to Coşkun to give us a theoretical framework of globalization with its historical background, but also analytically today. There you go. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Okay, hello, everyone. So I'll try to give you a brief introduction to globalization. So first of all, what should we understand by the term globalization? By globalization, we mean specifically globalization of economy. Globalization of economy is the globalization of production, distribution, exchange, trade, and all other related activities. Capitalist mode of production being the dominant mode of production, globalization is in fact globalization of capitalism. I must say that the globalization is an objective reality. It's not a strategy of the capitalist class. It's not their subjective choice. It is as objective as capitalism itself, or as objective as earthquakes. So let me give you a definition of globalization. Breaking down of national borders to allow the flow of goods, services, capitals, and to a lesser extent, labor, and also knowledge, information, technology, and know-how, and thus a closer integration of countries thanks to the gigantic reduction of production costs. So in this definition, there are two elements we must keep in mind. One is the gigantic cost of gigantic reduction of production costs. Secondly, breaking down of national borders. So why this gigantic reduction of production costs? That is because the new scientific and technological revolution in progress in many areas. So I can roughly say that there are 7 areas this revolution is in progress. And the first area is the one all the others are based on. And this first area is the microchip-based information and communication technologies. All others rest on this area. So secondly, the robotic technologies, then there's artificial intelligence, and then there's high performance synthetic materials and genetic engineering, biotechnology, and renewable energy technologies. So this scientific revolution is gaining momentum. This means globalization is gaining momentum. With the scientific revolution, we see profound changes in the structure of production, first of all. I mean, the processes of quality circles, just-in-time production, blockchain, etc. All those are the profound changes in the structure of production on global scale. And secondly, the production processes are linked on a global scale. An item, a component of an item, can be manufactured in many different countries on a global scale before being assembled for the global market. So, for example, for a car, it's minimum 20, even 30 countries involved in the manufacturing of these components. So they are linked on a global scale. Revolutionary production processes also mean lower cost of transportation and stockage. Reduction of cost means big increase in production and strong competition for profits. So that is the reduction of production costs. And the second element in that definition I gave was what breaks down the national borders. Let us look at the national market. If the production time of a commodity is halved, the market for that commodity will be doubled. If one thinks of all the national economies for all the commodities, we arrive at the conclusion that development of the means of production, development of the means of production creates an offer which grows faster and faster than the demand. And it is this acceleration that tears up any national border. First, by the movement of commodities, then by the movement of capitals. With borderless globalization, we pass from international to transnational. Well, international means there's a national economy, next to it, there's another national economy, and next to it, there's another national economy. It's kind of horizontal. But with the transnational, it's beyond that, it's above all that. So the global integration of production means global movement of capital in transnational sphere. So let's come back to the nation state. The nation state is on the way to disappear. Well, we know that. So why the nation state with its national economy is on the way to demise, it's on the way to its death? And the answer is very simple indeed, because nation state fulfilled its historical mission. It has no more mission. It hasn't got any other mission to fulfill. So what was its historical mission? It put an end to the feudal mode of production. That is important. Put an end to aristocratic privileges. Put an end to the internal customs, establishing free trade economy. This is important because in the feudal empires, the economy was not a monolithic and homogeneous lot, okay? So the feudal empires have got economies, rather addition of regional economies. One regional economy added to another one, another one, another one. So each regional economy has had its borders. So you couldn't just pass the border from, from locality to locality, from region to region. You had to pay taxes, you had to pay duties, and you had to have authorization to pass into other regions, and you had to have the authorizations to market your goods in another region. So nation state abolished that, thus establishing a free trade inside the country. This is exactly what the monopolist capital is doing today. Monopolist capital is establishing free trade on the global scale. But at that time, in the 19th century, the nation state was establishing free trade inside the country. So the nation state constitutes the protected national market, protected militarily and by law, of course, by customs. It protected its market against the other armies of the other nation states. So adopted a unique currency. Okay, so during feudal times, sometimes regions had different currencies, and one monetary and budgetary policy, and standardized the measures. What is a gram? What is a kilogram? What is a meter like? Right? Declared its state borders, created a nation, created a citizenship, and created a sovereign bourgeois state. That was in history. And if you look at all these measures, in fact, they are all protective measures. Nation state is protecting the national economy, okay? So in fact, it's conservative, it's conserving what it created. With the globalization, of course, everything changes. Globalization, first of all, I must say, affects all the countries. The capitalist countries with developed industrial base, okay, highly developed industrial base, that is the countries which are closer to the top of the hierarchy of the world capitalist system, benefits from all the advantages of globalization, okay? It's very beneficial for them. So in fact, they are in a state of kind of positive integration to globalization. And the other countries, most of the other countries, which are partially integrated into globalization or excluded totally from globalization, okay, they are in a state of what I call negative integration. So I use and propose the term negative integration. What does that mean? Negative integration means that they are partially and totally excluded from globalization, yet they have to suffer all the negative consequences of globalization. They cannot escape negative consequences of globalization. So it means that all the countries are integrated into globalization, some of them positively and maybe most of them negatively. So let me explain what are the negative consequences of being excluded from globalization, yet suffering its negative consequences. Failure to reach the global rate of profit devalues a capital. Wherever its origin, it's not important. If the origin is the national economy, okay, the capital of that national economy is devalued if it cannot reach the global rate of profit. So let me explain now. The value, what is value? Let's remember, value is the socially necessary labor time expanded in the production of a commodity. Okay, what does that mean? Socially necessary labor time. It's the time taken. It's the time it takes an average skilled worker to produce a commodity under the available technological conditions of the day. So, for a national production in the national economy, okay, available technological conditions are not that of advanced, high-level technological conditions globalization provides to developed industries. Okay, it is the national conditions, national existing available on national economy. So that means that socially necessary labor time is different for national and global economies. So, I mean, in a national production, if a commodity is produced in 30 minutes, while at the global level, the global production level, it is produced in 10 minutes, they are exactly the same commodity. So they have the same value translated into the same price. They have the same price. So that you can say, well, I wasted 30 minutes. I spent 30 minutes for the production of the commodity. They cannot be the same price. No, that means that you have wasted 20 minutes for nothing. You produce something 20 minutes extra time. You didn't produce the commodity socially necessary labor time on global scale. You produce it on the level of national scale. So what does it mean? You have a lot of commodities, okay, which must have the price, global price, cannot have your, you wasted your time for it, and they're unsellable. You cannot sell them. So they are piled up. They pile up in the warehouses, in the storehouses, okay, and you fire all the workers which did not produce at the level of socially necessary labor time on global scale. So you don't need those workers. So those workers, they don't have any more subsistence. Maybe they try to immigrate to countries with a higher industrial development. And of course, you wasted the capital invested in the production of those unsellable goods. No? Your capital is devalued. And if you are quoted in the stock exchange of the country, the value of your shares drop, and maybe you go bankrupt. So this is the negative consequences. This is the negative consequences of the economies who are excluded or partially excluded from globalization. So we see that globalization is very painful. It destroys whole communities. It reminds us the enclosure acts of England in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. You know, I mean, at that time, before the Industrial Revolution, the property of the land was common. It was common property, and the pastures were common property. So the peasants were using this land and the pastures. But with the Enclosures Act, the aristocrats put fences around their lands. The land became privatized. It is privatized. It means that peasants didn't have any more subsistence. They had a choice: either physically starve, or leave this land alone and go to the newly built industrial centers. So generation after generation, those peasants turned into workers, spend their lives in the nightmarish, in the hellish conditions to realize the industrial revolution. So if you are living in a more comfortable conditions today, it's thanks to their sufferings, generation after generation suffering. So the global economy is destructive, like it was with the adoption of Enclosures Act in England. Now, finally, some few words I will have about the world market. World is a single market because the world is a single habitable unit for humans. Humans can live anywhere and they live everywhere, from polar regions to deserts. Super volcano Toba in Sumatra erupted 74,000 years ago. And this was the biggest eruption in millions of years, triggered a catastrophic volcano winter that wiped out 95% of life on Earth, 95% of life on Earth, and nearly wiped out the entire human population. And according to estimates, there were only 15,000 survivors. This minimum number yet was sufficient to keep the gene pool diversified enough to carry out the continuation of the species. Yet, no extinction occurred. Ice Age, even worse, thousands of years, humanity survived Ice Age. There were no extinction. The human beings are extremely resilient. Conclusion is that the mode of existence of human beings is a global existence. Thus, it's not natural that a person be forbidden or be forced to live in a certain place by threat or a violence of an external force like a state. The state is the external force, forces the human beings to live in a place or not to live in a place. So I pass simply to the ontological level. The state is a human product, okay? Producer is the human, product is the state. So the state is a human product like shoes, ice creams, satellites, computers, cellular phones. And ontological priority is with the producer, not with the product, not with the product. So in fact, any anti-immigrant policy is not only against humanity, but ontologically it's incorrect. Ontologically incorrect. Well, I'll give the example of Tolstoy. For example, Tolstoy wrote War and Peace. Well, you can say that the time was ripe and the spirit of the time was ripe, that anybody could have written War and Peace. Any good writer could have done it. Somebody called Ivanovich could have written War and Peace. No, it couldn't have written War and Peace. It could have written just as a good novel, but it wouldn't be War and Peace. It will be some other novel. So Tolstoy was the producer, War and Peace was the product. If Tolstoy didn't exist, War and Peace wouldn't exist. But if War and Peace didn't exist, Tolstoy would still exist. The result is that oneness of the world market is its fundamental character. World market is an objective reality. Today, it's a given reality. But at the beginning, it was only a hidden potential reality. And the whole economic history of the world is the unfolding of this hidden potential reality. Unfolding here means progressive, step-by-step, progressive concretization of an abstract idea. Throughout this unfolding process, the world becomes more and more globalized, and finally today, the world becomes nearly fully globalized. With fully globalized world, history, with big H, history finally becomes world history. Well, I stop there. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. So I'll now pass to Mariana to tell us a little bit about, so this is let's say the theoretical framework of where globalization is going. I heard a few things about that being an objective reality as part of the history of capitalism, and there are dynamics inherent to capitalism that push into that direction. And those dynamics can be observed 100 years ago, but today they can be observed in real life, the actual fact of having a globalized market. So this is what we heard. In terms of doing politics, where do we stand, and what are the what is the actual living framework in which we operate?
Hi, everybody. Um, so, so I think I wanted to start by recognizing that since we know, not only us that are in this room, but also like in more general in society, that climate crisis is a global issue, and has like we have been talking about here, like I'm starting with this because this is my point of starting, right, in terms of like understanding what we are doing and why I will do the rest of the speech. But I think like the thing that is really interesting and that we need to kind of work on it is that although we understand that not only climate crisis, but a lot of the phenomena that we are seeing happening, a lot of the things that we are politically seeing happening are global phenomena. We don't see them as being done at a global level, and I think that's the main issue, the main point that I'd like to pass to you today. That the attacks that are happening against us are being done at global level, and that is the reason why we need to be thinking at global terms. So we know nowadays the global governance structures that exist, they are part of our normal life now. And I wanted to just like go through some of the examples, or like some of them for us to understand a little better what I'm saying. So there are several functions that before were with the national state that now are not being done at national level, but are being done at a global level. So, for example, the economical function of the state is being delivered to financial institutions, to private arbitrary courts, to the World Economical Forums and tax havens. And the political functions of the state are being delivered to subsystems like the European Union, but also are being articulated at a global level and articulated at a global level by institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the G7, the G20. So the whole political function are not happening at national level, but on these places, on these institutions that are global institutions. Although, as was already said, they will exclude, or like they will integrate it in a negative way, a lot of the people and a lot of the society that we are talking about. And then if you look at the social functions, there is still some part that is at a national level. So the national states are being used as the primary instrument for oppression, so has police states. But still we see, and more actually, how these functions are being done at global level. For example, through NATO, through Frontex, but also the increasing amount of online vigilance that is happening at a global level and being coordinated and managing at the global level. So through this, we can understand that these functions that were before happening on, on the national scale are now happening completely on this global perspective. And we are aware of these different actors, right? So it's not that what I said is like, oh, I never thought about, like the power of EMF. But actually, we need to understand how that changed the work that we have to do. And before I go there, I just also wanted to remember ourselves that that the fact that we are living in this level of globalization, of like this global capitalism, actually gives us certain advantage. So the global financialized capital actually means that there is a high level of system interdependence. So it means that there is extreme fragility of the system. There is several choking points, and there is a huge unpredictability that exists with this. And they are aware of that, right? So in the terms of like the perspective from the capitalist perspective, they are not like they are a lot of times in panic or in a situation of like anxiety because of this, the fact that the globalization actually gives or it's much more fragile. And creates this panic and hysteria. And I think like just a small example that we can see with this, and we can go through several others, is the Suez Canal. So we know that when the canal, the Suez Canal was blocked, like just for some time, period of time, that should not create the level of history that actually created at a global level, right? So like that's an example of how fragile this is. And so this means that we have to understand, we have to change or have a new perspective of why this change our strategies, what it means to do internationalism in 2025. And what I said is I'm also asking in terms of like what actually our meetings look like, our strategy look like, our daily based life look like, right? And that's the question that we have in front of us. How do we change the way that we are working based on this reality? And I wanted to recognize that we have been operating in the last years in a global framework, right? So like there are several, for example, if you pick up the feminist strikes, there was always the aim of doing feminist strikes on different, like in different countries, in different places. The climate justice movement is really articulated at international level, at a global level, and tries to do several, like campaigns and actions together and so on. So I'm not saying that we are not doing that, but the way that we are building our strategies, our demands, our programs, is still thinking on a national level strategy. And that's the point that I wanted to make, right? So the fact is like, because of this level of globalization, there is no sovereignty of national level to implement the change that are necessary. So this means that the way that we strategize, the points, like the opportunities that we have, which are the fragile points that we want to attack, what are the programs that we have, the demands that we have, and so on, need to be think at the global level and not at national strategy level. So in more practical terms, how does this look like, right? I'm saying this is really beautiful and so on. Maybe you don't agree, maybe you agree, but like how, how does this change our practices and how we act? So I want to share two important steps that we need to do. So one is to have resources allocations for international coordination. And the second one is to build mandate for international organization. So when I say, so getting again to the first one, when I'm talking about resource allocations for international coordination, one way for you to think about it is to have at least 1/4 of your organization, of your core capacity, to be dedicated to international coordination. So imagine if your core team will be 4 people, this can mean that one of those people is doing all the work to international work, international coordination, and putting all the capabilities on that. Or it could mean that each of you are using 1/4 of your capacity to do that, or any types of combinations that you can imagine in this sense. So it can look like in really different ways depending of like how you organize and so on. But this need of putting capability from your organization in international coordination is necessary, and it's a precondition for us to be able to do the rest of the work that we need to do. And the second part is to, as I said, mandate building for international organization. And here we can think a little bit more in terms of, okay, a big part of our main strategy needs to be happening, needs to come from international coordination space. This is really different. This is very different from what we have been doing in the last years. And I want to just explore a little bit this because I think that in one hand, we are really afraid about this, or like a lot of the groups have been afraid about this idea because we feel that it's going to be, we will have an alienated superstructure at a world level to make decisions for us. And secondly, but at the same time that this is happening, actually, like at the same time that we have this fear of doing global coordination, our strategy are being changed by global external events. Like we saw that with COVID. So we have external global factors that change completely our plans and force us to be able to have to respond to these. But we are not being able to actually respond. We are being reactive to it, and even in our responses, we are not sure how to do it because we don't have the spaces to be able to have that articulation and know how to proceed. And to explore a little bit, or like to deconstruct this idea of what does this mean, I wanted to just go through some of the examples that we can look like of how does it look like to have these mandate building for international organization. So we can look, for example, to the anti-globalization movement with one of the key moments with the Seattle Battle, but not only, of course, that were able to build a global agenda and have a global articulation. And this was able to not only have a global impact of stopping the political and social global integration of the corporations, but also to have local and national impacts, because a lot of the structure readjustments plans were stopped in several countries. So we see here one example of how a global agenda can stop the things that are happening at a global level and the impacts that it has automatically at national level also. Another example that we can look at a little bit different is if we look to the movement, the social and big mass movements in support when Vietnam War was happening against US imperialism. And here we saw, so the movement understood that there was an opportunity to use one specific international moment to create a global movement that is way beyond just that specific situation, right? And we had a peace movement, against chemical weapons movement, global anti-imperialism movement happening. So this is also like another approach in that sense. And lastly, we can also think of situations when an entire organization needed to change what they were doing, or to put a lot of capability on executing a strategy of other organizations. So, for example, sending guerrillas and sending international brigades to the Spanish Civil War, to Nicaragua War, and to Rojava, because it's part of your strategy. So with the Spanish Civil War, it was part of the whole strategy in Europe to stop the increasement of the fascism. So that was necessary to do in order to have a bigger impact, let's say like this, and not focus just on that. So basing on these examples, we need now to understand what makes sense in our context, but knowing that we need to to have an overall political analysis that is informed by the global coordination space, because as we have been talking, the current system operated at a global level. So for us to understand and to have a clear political analysis of what is necessary, what are the opportunities, how can we move forward, we need to do that at a, like with a global informed way. And the second one is that the strategies that we make, the strategy that we have has each organization, needs to be verified, needs to be checked at global level. So when, for example, now currently, although I'm from Portugal, now I'm in Spain, but when, for example, a group in Spain made a strategy that should not be only a strategy that makes sense for Catalonia or even for Madrid, no, for Spain in general and for the different parts and regions, it has to be checked at the global level. And this check needs to happen in two ways. So one is the relevance at what is the relevance? Why is this relevant? Sorry, at the global movement building, and also if it's actually the strategy that you have actually has an effective power at a local level, because maybe you're fighting for something, like in your local analysis, maybe that makes sense, but when you have the global perspective, you understand, and usually that's what is happening, that the decision of that or the power of that is not happening at that level, is happening in other place. So if independently of what you do at that level, it's impossible to have any solutions, any answer, even if you're the one executing them, so we kind of need to have that strategy at that global level to then understand how we operationalize that in our field, in where we are, and so on and so on. So yeah, I think that's what mainly I wanted to share with you today. And I'm more than welcome to clarify anything that I missed in my presentation or in my speech now on the Q&A. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mariana. So basically, what I heard is we started with the idea or with the observation that globalization originally, technically, let's say, is to describe an objective economic reality, right? And then as it happens in capitalism, as it actually builds capitalism, but as it happens in capitalism, it also produces its own economic institutions, economic structure around it. And that then pushes for other functions of the state, political functions, social functions, which may or may not follow the same more trivial pathway that the economic structure is taking through. So that was one of the things that Coşkun was saying, that when capital has complete fluidity at the global market, labor doesn't have that, right? So that's also part of the integration discussion anyway. But the point here is that it might not be linear or, let's say, uniform, but it's still walking like a crab, right? And even in the political spheres and even the social cultural sphere, it's not just back and forth, but sometimes it's also sideways. But that doesn't mean that the process is not happening, right, in the direction of globalization. So that does mean that for people who want to change the world, or in equivalently, who want to stop the world from changing too much in other directions, so anybody who wants to influence the fate of humanity, we have to understand where sovereignty lies, where a decision makes sense, and basically, so the final line in this argument was Mariana's. That is to my mind, when I'm hearing it, is more like globalization informed politics and globalization informed strategy, right? So that is more or less where we are looking at, and this is also one of the things that we talk about in All In the book. So this is what I heard, and thanks for your interventions to both of our speakers. Now it's a good time to get some questions or comments from anybody in the room. These questions can be asked if you prefer to say it out loud. You can do that. You can also simply write in the chat if you're not in a comfortable position to speak. As you speak, you can also choose to turn on your camera or not. It's completely up to you. So yeah, now the floor is ours. If anybody would like to say anything. And as for speaking, you can raise a hand in any possible. You can raise a hand physically, and I will see it, or you can raise a hand. There's a button, or you can just put something in the chat. So whichever way feels more comfortable for you. And as others are thinking and digesting, I'll give the word to Jasper. Go ahead.
Thank you everyone, and love the book. So my only question is, okay, let's go. I think I know the group that I'm working with, and what part of that we would be good to fill with the ideological mobilization. So it's just, let's go. That's my question. When do we start?
Great, thanks. I'll give some time for others to think and reflect. Not about your question, but about like whatever they may have in mind, instead of like doing ping pong with the speakers or with myself. Just gonna give you a little bit of time to see if there are other questions. Because again, you can put it in the chat, you can raise your hand, you can speak out.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Pedro, yes. If please a bit louder, but
Okay, let me just put my camera on.
yes, if
okay.
you prefer to, yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for all the speakers. I think it was really insightful. Actually, you got thinking me about a lot of things, especially because I'm doing a kind of a small video to Barroso, because of all the issues about Barroso and the neo-extractivism that is going around there, and all of even the local clash from the people that live in Covas de Barroso, that some of them are against the mines, and there are also some people that are willing to defend the mines on their land. And this got me thinking about, because for me, one of the biggest challenges about globalization is that sometimes it's so broad that we kind of oppress the local voices. And I think in a way this is kind of a challenging, because we go there with very fancy frameworks and with the best of our intentions, but somehow we neglect to hear the local voices. So I think this is not, it's a question, but it's also like a kind of a discussion that I would like to raise, right? So, and in a way, it kind of gets me thinking about how can we really help the local people, like with this global mindset. So yeah, I know that we are all iterating in very challenging times and answers. So, but this is something that you guys got me thinking about. How can we iterate with this, with this global framework, but also act in very local terms? I don't know if this makes sense.
Thank you very much. So yeah, Jasper's question was like, okay, let's go. How do we do that? And Pedro's question is more like, yeah, how do we actually do that? Because in the title we have the translocal movement building, right? So that is the point of going beyond our local context, and that local can be geographical but also topical, right? You can be working on a specific topic when then you understand that that topic is not isolated and so on. So the question of like, how do we build globalization from the bottom to the left and to the left, right? So that is the kind of, yeah, I think that's a very curious question. I'm wondering if there are other questions in the room, or if not, I'll Shall, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just trying to word this right, so please bear with me. The first part of my question is, with the rise of nationalism we're seeing around the world in the form of the far right, and with its economic views of individualism, growth, and deregulation, what roles do you think that the nation state could have within, I don't want to say stopping that rise, but within being able to be a part of this change that we need to see? And then a second part is to do with the kind of global outlook on movements, and where I haven't quite finished reading the book. I've been reading it while in court this week. So apologies if this is answered in the book. But when we see in different types of social movements or activism and so on, there's a lot to be said about local movements and what local issues can do to spark a moment of whirlwind. And what would you say to a globalization strategy that actually would dissociate people on the local level from this change that we need?
Thank you very much. And there is another question in the chat that I will read out for those who might not be able to see the chat because maybe you're on the phone, maybe it's too small. So the question is, now that communist movement is split into ideological line, a new international could be based on revolutionariness, quote unquote. So we need to decide the basic qualities of a revolutionary organization, what it means. An international could be a world party of parties, but a coordination, quote unquote, could be based on mass organizations following the same strategy. So the questions related to that coming from in this intervention is: one, does this formula make sense? If so, where to start, from the parties or from the mass organizations? And two, how can regional coordinations be formed, and should the global South movements take the lead in this? So there are two questions about like this, so there's a lot of question about like how to do this translocal stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, we are all local. Like there's no one who is not except capital, right? Like human beings, we are local. And then we are trying to understand how we can make sense translocally. So there's all this question, and there's also the other part of the maybe throwing back to the positive integration, negative integration, where does the leadership lie and what makes more sense? So this is what I'm hearing. I would like to pass to Mariana first to answer whichever questions you may want to react to. And in the meantime, I'll try to formulate another question for Coşkun.
Yeah. So I was still digesting the different things that people also raised, because I think they are pointing to really different issues somehow. But I guess like one way for you to think, or one way for us to think, is that currently we are doing most of our strategies at national level, right? At national state level. So for example, picking up the discussion of like that Pedro was raising, Shal was raising about like, okay, but we have local things that are happening, you know, like a specific project in a specific place. How do you, like how do you strategize around that? And the truth is that nowadays we are like, when we are talking about that specific project and we are thinking about the strategy for it, we are not only thinking about what the municipality does, right? And what are the different actors around that at that local level. We are thinking about like the company that is probably a multinational company or has that ramification, and we are thinking about like the government and like the different institutions at national level that are putting, like that have power over, and how do we, like how do we confront them, or how do we how do we confront them in several different ways in order to stop that project, or in order to change that, right? So usually is on that level, in that and on those terms that you think. And what we are saying is that you cannot only think on the terms of like that national strategy. You also have to to think on like the global strategy. So what I'm saying with this is that you still understand how the things at a local level are happening, but the way that you are considering what is the strategical most like what makes more strategically sense in terms of next steps, you have that check also at a global level. So that's one way to say it. Then the other part that I wanted to say is still related to this is that any project that we are, right, we always have to understand, because we have an amount of limited resources in general. So we always have to understand what is the aim for, right? What is the aim that we are, why are we engaging on that specific fight? In that specific project, how do we want to, like who do we want to mobilize and for what, right? And understanding that is essential to also like understand, does this, does this project in specific make sense to work on it or not, what is the impact that is going to bring, and to stop the capitalism system, right? So that's another way for us to think. And sometimes there are fights that you may be doing at a local level in the terms of how you are talking with people, but that you understand that they are able to spark a much more large mass movement that you need to then like confront the state and to be able to do system change. So that's also like something that we have to think on when we are wandering around it. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that related to this, that I guess there is also like a part that we need to check that is more around yeah, so I can give you like a small example. Like some years ago, I was talking with some comrades from Spain that are fighting against renewable mega projects in some parts of Galicia, but not only in other parts. And I like they were saying like for the people, like for the local communities, this is a huge issue and they are fighting against it. But the way that they were fighting against it was they end up fighting against renewable energy. Like, and they were like saying like, okay, but we, like, how do we handle these? Like we have to hear these voices and so on. And yes, we have, but at the same time, we understand that we cannot have like we cannot turn, like we cannot turn to each other in a sense that we know that at a global level we need to stop fossil fuel, and that for that people need to understand that and cannot have like a discourse that is okay. I prefer that stop that fossil fuel carry-ons instead of having this wild, like renewable energy here. So the point is not how, like the point is should be more around how do you fight against that project that can be, for example, extractivism project, or it can be like a mega project that is not based on, that is not hearing the local communities. So it's being forced on that. So like there is an oppression happening, but how can you engage with that at the same time that you the way that you're communicating with people, the way that you're doing the strategy and so on is based on the need that you are hearing from, like the countries that Spain before colonialized, but not only saying, well, you need to stop fossil fuel now because we are being killed and all my land is gone, like, so like that's there you cannot separate, like they are not people that are more important than others. So like it's more about how can we connect these kind of things. So I guess in the end, what I'm trying to say is, one, to hear to understand what are the needs at local level, but not having that as the only thing that we are listened to, and understanding how we can, like still fighting that, but in a perspective that doesn't put that fight against a bigger fight that we need to do as a working class and create this division between us. And at the same time, the way that we are thinking currently in strategy, understand, okay, if I'm how do I analyze this at national level, and what is the change that I need to do instead of being analyzing at national level to do it at a global level. So that will be like the two things that I wanted to share, and I will leave some of the other answers for being answered by other person, and then I can come back if that's necessary.
Thanks, Mariana. I guess one thing that kind of appears in my head as I'm listening to this discussion is of Jane McAlloway's Organizing for Power, and like the entire organizing framework that she developed, where she insists so much and more or less alone saying you have to make choices and you have to divest from stuff and you have to invest in other stuff. And you really have to analyze what gives strategic leverage. And this, she's talking about like union organizing, community organizing. You have to pick your fight, and the point here is that what gives leverage in terms of people's power building or working class power building, right? And this is about context analysis. This is about analyzing the actors in the room and so on. So I think the additional element that we're talking about here is that you have to check every time you make a strategic choice, you are considering these things. Like you are making a list of priorities about like how you're going to spend your time, not individual time, but like organizational time. And another element that is essential here, I guess, is what I'm hearing, is that there is another criterion, which is its relevance for global power building power, right? Global people's power building. How does this interact with it? And this is an essential question that we have to ask. So I think that is what I'm hearing. And in terms of building that power, now I want to direct the attention a little bit to Coşkun. I'm gonna rephrase the questions that I heard, which may or may not represent exactly what was said. But one question was about how can we, like, at least this is what I heard. How can we make sense of rise of nationalism hand in hand with globalization as two dynamics? So first there's that bit, which is it seems a bit contradictory, right, in the capitalist core. But also, as this is happening, how much could nation state play a role for today's, like, as a terrain? What does it mean? And then the question that was in the chat that I read out was about, so when we have this positive integration, negative integration, sometimes it is like global north, global south. This is how people speak about it and so on. So where would the leadership stand in this? Because, for a very long time now, global south people in general, like organizations, movements, have been much more ambitious, have been much more dedicated than what we have been seeing in where I live, where Mariana lives, and so on. So where does leadership stand? And I'm just gonna throw the ball to Coşkun to hear what he has to say about any of these things, if he wants to.
Yes, when we say that nation states with their national economies were excluded from globalization process, it means millions and millions of people who were trusting, who were living in those national economies, were excluded from globalization process. So in fact, the nationalism is a false remedy against the great population movements. Really false remedy, I think, like that. So for us, the most important thing is the world peace. I mean, to prevent a third world war, it's easy. I mean, it's not easy, but it will be prevented. There won't be, I promise, there won't be a third world war. Because China, nobody is immigrating from China to metropolitan countries, and the students and the experts come to the European countries and to America. They want to go back as soon as possible to China, because this China is a transition society. Transition to what, we don't know, but we think that it will be towards socialism. It is already constructed an umbrella, against the Third World War. So this is why America losing the losing its hegemony, and electing the again the false remedy, electing the Trump. It will not put a break on the backward movement of American hegemony. I think, I think that China is already constructed the umbrella against the World War, and that is for the time being the the very first step. We cannot even think of yet the global movement against capitalism, but we are having the thought of it. I mean, like when Marx was saying workers of the world unite. I mean, it's sort of, he was talking about 1 million workers. I'll read you something very interesting. In the Communist Manifesto 1848, okay, let's say we are now talking how to organize the global opposition, global movement against negative consequences of this globalization. That's what we are thinking. But in 1848, in the Communist Manifesto, Marx was saying, modern industry has established the world market. That's very funny, no? I mean, what a sense of humor. For which the discovery of America paved the way. This market, world market, this market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication. And when he was saying that, there was no telephone, there was no fax, there was no internet, there was no cars, no trucks, no planes, no highways, no motorways, no airplanes, no passenger ships. So there was only 4 passenger ships, wooden paddlers. Those are wooden paddlers. And there are 4 ships. Okay. So he's talking about the communication, immense development of communication. These 4 ships making a triangular trade, leaving England, going to Africa, taking the slaves, going to America, leaving the slaves, taking the commodities, bringing back to Italy. That was called triangular trade, 1840. And this is for Marx. For Marx, it was immense development of commerce, navigation, So I mean, he has a sense of humor, but the point is, we started thinking about this thing. This is very important. This is very important. We started thinking about these things. That's what I think. And he said, well, he was, Marx was the free trade. And he said, on the question of free trade, he said, the protective system of our day is conservative. He's talking about national economy of the nation state. Says the protective system of our day is conservative, while the free trade system is destructive, talking about globalization of his day. It breaks up all nationalities and pushes the antagonism of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie to the extreme point. In a word, the free trade system hastens the social revolution. It is in this revolutionary sense alone, gentlemen, that I vote in favor of free trade. So he was the theoretician for globalization. You see, so I mean, this is very interesting. Rise of nationalism is their last stand of the bourgeoisie. If after so many years, after 150 years, still counting on the rise of nationalism, it means he is losing. To my mind, it's losing. So this fantastic contradictions are pushed to their extremes. This is not bad, because I trust those billions and billions of immigrants do their job when the time comes. Okay.
Thank you very much. There is still, we still have a little bit of time, and also there's a question in the chat, so I'm just going to read it out. What role do you think indigenous movements, perhaps like Land Back, play for this movement, or for this, let's say, landscape? So I'm going to give the word back to Mariana. If you, in the meantime, came up with some other aspects of, like what are we talking about? Like, how do we do this translocal movement building? What is the movement we're talking about? How do we establish that, and so on? So I'm just going to give back the word to Mariana as we slowly close.
Yeah, maybe I can pick up some things. So one thing, just to build up on the last answers, not to add anything to what was said. Well, not to go more in depth, because it was already a really good answer. But I think like something it came to my mind, and I guess it's really interesting with the far right nationalisms and so on. We were talking with some comrades from the migrant rights struggles, and like in fact there is the fluidity of workers going up and forwards it will carry on, and because it's a necessity to happen, and there is a lot of like fluency of migrants and workers going in between different countries. And the main point with, or on their understanding, and I think it's really interesting for our conversation, was that like the main point with this nationalism being more and more acute, and with this really repression way of doing it, was to discipline, like more in terms of this discipline, sorry, to give to make the workers much more disciplinary to the power, and to make them to be more afraid to organize between themselves and to empower themselves. And we're talking a lot about that, the fact that this was again like a way for the national state to be a police state actually, and to have this kind of imposition of breaking any kind of empowerment that can happen, but not that it was more focused on that as an answer to this, the level of fragility that is having currently, and the need to to increase that in order to maintain their stability. So it's actually interesting for like to add to what was already said. In terms of like the yeah, so in terms of like the coordination spaces that some person before had some questions around that, and I guess it also aligns a little bit with the last question that was made. I don't want to get too much on it because I really love the subject. So if I get too much on it, I will spend too much time talking. And we do have a webinar that is going to be focused specifically on the coordination. So on that, we will see better these kind of like issues. How does it look like, like who has power and how we should do these power dynamics, balances, and so on and so on. So I don't want to get too much on it, but I think like it's really important that when we are thinking about, okay, like what are the global strategies that we need to have to take in consideration the different voices that exist and the different struggles that exist, and more than that, to understand that there is a lot of communities that are completely being ignored what they're saying, and how can we like actually engage everybody on the table in that sense. But at the same time, I think, and this is the point that I really want to making this call, is that we cannot take the responsibility from us, right? So we are like, especially if we are if I'm thinking more in terms of like the people that are in this room, that are people mostly as far as I can see or understand, that are probably in more the global north. We have access to the central of capital. We have access to the center of imperialism in a way that others don't have, and we are able to have much more impact. And not only that ability, has also that responsibility to do that. So I think it's always important to have this balance about not waiting for like not transfer our responsibility to other people in that sense. so yeah, so I think that's what I wanted to say it for now. And Sinan, back to you.
Thank you very much. So I'll start to wrap up unless there are other questions or questions that were not answered, then you're like, why, how so, and you would like to insist. So I'll just give us a minute for people to check. Coşkun, do you want to say something?
Yes, I want
Yes,
to
go
say
ahead,
something.
please. Of course.
I mean, this is, big population movements. We don't realize, but this is extremely powerful. Stiglitz was saying something very important. He said, if there's a medicine and if there's a treatment for a sick child anywhere in the world, the father or the mother would reach that medicine, that treatment center at any cost for his child. No matter what. I mean, this is the power. We are talking about the power. And I just want to say the life, the world is becoming really, capitalism expands and gets deeper. And result, world shrinks. World shrink. Capitalism expands, but the world shrinks. Princeton University has carried out a project some years ago, I think 20 years ago. They proved that anyone on this earth, any individual in this earth, can be linked to any other individual in this world simply in 5 steps. One step is defined as one meets somebody. That's step 1. That somebody meets another somebody else. That's second step. Maximum in 5 steps. A teacher in Burkina Faso can be linked to Japanese emperor. Okay, that is that. I think that was in 4 steps. So in 5 steps, really, they are just having the cautiously. So the world is that much shrinking. So that means an incredible power for the billions, the mass movement of millions. So what we see today, the immigration today, is just a trickle, just a small drop in the sea. So, and well, I mean, let's say that barbarians came to knock off the Roman Empire with guns. At the moment, immigrants coming with plastic in small boats, and so they may come in some different way next. We don't know. Okay, that's all one say. Okay.
Yeah. And maybe just to add before you pick up, Sinan,
Mhm.
that I think something that is really interesting when we understand that we have to have a global strategy perspective and to, like not only be informed, but also to check and to build this strategy together, is that we have much more concrete enemies that are, like much fewer enemies, let's say, like these specific targets that we can unite really different people around them. And I think that's opportunity that we have, and there is much more opportunities on this kind of thinking that you start to understand that you have when you're thinking on these terms. And so I also just wanted to rephrase, like to point that on the table, because I think it's curious, and maybe to answer a little bit of the first question that was made, that we are still ignoring it, although it's really important. I guess like the one next very practical step, well, will be to talk with us directly, but then that's probably will happen. But I think it's interesting to actually rethinking what is the strategy that you have nowadays with this perspective, and like checking what does it change, and also at the same time and understand how can we win much more this argument, because I think like in a lot of the movements nowadays we are completely disconnected, or like are not thinking that the way that we need to strategize is at a global level, and that's making us have much less power that we actually are able to. So I think that's also like something that is really important, is how we can, like not having this argument only between ourselves, that maybe we have some level of agreement, but to bring that argument to much other spaces where we need to win that understanding and change the way that we are doing strategy. So yeah, so give that has like really easy no, but simple next steps in that sense, like these 3. So get back to you, Sinan.
Thank you very much, everyone. So this was the first webinar of the book All In, Revolutionary Theory to Stop Climate Collapse, on globalization and translocal movement building. The main argument that we're making here is that globalization is not a preference, is not a taste. We're not making a moral argument here. We are saying all politics and strategy has to be globalization informed, because that is the context in which we live and operate. Our problems, our suffering, our struggles, our solutions, they live in a universe that in a terrain that can be defined only at the global level. So following up, first there is the book, of course, if anybody hasn't seen it yet. And second of all, please do join our newsletter. If you're watching this video, if you're here, you already know how to get to the newsletter. But that is because we are publishing different articles, follow-up articles, and not only writing them, but also asking others to write articles on the subjects related to the book. There will be upcoming events. This is first of the 6 webinars that we want to organize based on the propositions. So that's also another way of being together and getting involved. And if you already read the book and you're like, let's go, please talk to us directly. Send us an email. There are billions of social media accounts, but talk to us directly. We are not, as we keep on saying this, Mariana and I, we are not authors. We are organizers. So organize us and organize with us. We're not interested in, like, we wrote this book because somebody had to write it. But our main point is to use it as a strategy and organization tool. And as closing, I want to thank Miguel for having the annoying and cumbersome transcription work that he offered us for this session to be a bit more inclusive than it would be otherwise. So thanks everyone. I think this is it for today, and see you next time. Cheers.
Yeah.